The annual Texas Economic Forum at the Dallas Convention Center was the state's premier gathering of political and business leaders. The cavernous main hall was filled to capacity. Over 2,000 attendees in business attire, seated at round tables draped in white linen. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and two massive screens flanked the central stage, where a podium stood with the seal of Texas prominently displayed. This year's theme, the future of the Texas economy, had drawn particular interest due to the scheduled appearance of both Governor Greg Abbott and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on a panel discussing economic development initiatives. Their contrasting approaches to stimulating growth in underserved communities had become a central point of political debate in the state. At the head table, positioned directly in front of the stage, sat the state's most influential business leaders, CEOs from energy companies, tech firms, and financial institutions. The event's organizer, the Texas Business Roundtable, had ensured a balanced audience with leaders from across the political spectrum. Though the group leaned conservative given the state's business environment, Governor Abbott had arrived early, shaking hands and posing for photos with supporters. At 65, he projected the confidence of a seasoned politician who had dominated Texas politics for over a decade. Wearing a dark suit with a Texas flag pin, he moved comfortably through the crowd of admirers, occasionally glancing toward the entrance where Congresswoman Crockett would soon appear. Crockett arrived precisely on schedule, accompanied by a small team of aides carrying folders and tablets. At 42, the former civil rights attorney turned congresswoman had established herself as one of the most effective progressive voices in Texas. Dressed in a tailored navy suit with a subtle red blouse, she navigated the room with practiced ease, greeting business leaders and community representatives with equal warmth. The tension between the two political figures was palpable as they took their places on stage alongside the panel's other participants. A prominent economist, the mayor of Dallas, and the CEO of a major technology company. The moderator, respected business journalist Maria Santos, took her position at the central podium. "Welcome to our keynote panel on economic development strategies," Santos began. "Today, we have the privilege of hearing from leaders with diverse perspectives on how to strengthen the Texas economy while ensuring opportunity for all communities." For the first 45 minutes, the discussion remained substantive but predictable. The economist presented data on Texas's growth patterns. The mayor discussed local initiatives, and the CEO outlined private sector priorities. When Governor Abbott's turn came, he emphasized his administration's approach of tax incentives, deregulation, and business-friendly policies. "Under my administration, Texas has led the nation in job creation and business relocation," Abbott declared confidently. "Our formula is simple. Get government out of the way, cut taxes, and let the private sector thrive. The results speak for themselves." Then came Congresswoman Crockett's opportunity to present her alternative vision. She outlined what she called the Community Economic Partnership Plan, a comprehensive approach to economic development, focusing on historically underserved urban and rural communities through targeted investment, workforce development, and infrastructure improvements. "Economic growth must be inclusive to be sustainable," Crockett explained. "My plan creates public-private partnerships focused on communities that have been left behind by traditional economic development approaches. By investing in infrastructure, education, and access to capital in these areas, we create new markets and opportunities that benefit the entire Texas economy." Her presentation included specific data on successful pilot programs and projected economic returns based on similar initiatives in other states. The audience listened attentively, with some business leaders taking notes. If you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. You're about to witness an extraordinary moment when calculated mockery backfires spectacularly, demonstrating how substance and preparation can triumph over political theater in the most unexpected way. As the panel moved into the discussion phase, Santos directed a question to Governor Abbott. "Governor, what are your thoughts on Congresswoman Crockett's Community Economic Partnership proposal, particularly its focus on public-private investment in underserved areas?" Abbott leaned forward, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. What happened next would dramatically alter the trajectory of the event and create a viral moment that would be discussed for months to come. "Well, Maria," Abbott began, his tone taking on an unmistakably condescending edge, "I always appreciate the Congresswoman's enthusiasm, though her economic understanding seems rooted more in progressive wishful thinking than practical reality." His smile widened as scattered laughter emerged from his supporters in the audience. "The proposal we just heard is what I'd call economic fantasy land. It's the same failed approach we've seen from Washington Democrats for decades. Throw taxpayer money at problems, create new bureaucracies, and pretend that government can engineer prosperity." Abbott turned slightly toward Crockett, his expression now openly mocking. "The Congresswoman's plan essentially comes down to this. Let's take money from successful businesses and communities, filter it through government agencies that take their cut, then hand what's left to politically selected, underserved areas, while smothering everyone in regulations." He made exaggerated air quotes around underserved areas, drawing more laughter from his supporters. It's the kind of economic policy you'd expect from someone whose experience comes from law school theory, rather than actually building a business or creating jobs, Abbott continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "It might sound nice in a faculty lounge or a progressive fundraiser, but in the real world, it's a recipe for economic disaster." The mockery was calculated and politically effective, at least initially. Abbott's supporters were openly chuckling now, while Crockett's expression remained neutral, though those watching closely might have noticed her making a small note on the pad in front of her. "The Texas miracle didn't happen because of government programs," Abbott concluded with theatrical certainty. "It happened because we trusted Texans, not bureaucrats, to drive our economy. The Congresswoman's plan would reverse everything that has made our state successful." As Abbott leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of someone who believed he'd delivered a knockout blow, Santos turned to Crockett. "Congresswoman, would you like to respond?" Crockett took a moment before answering, glancing briefly at her notes before looking up. The audience prepared for what they expected would be an emotional defense of her plan or a partisan counterattack. What they witnessed instead would become one of the most discussed political exchanges in recent Texas history. "Thank you for that colorful characterization of my proposal, Governor," Crockett began, her voice calm and measured. "Before I address your specific critiques, I'd like to correct a factual error in your description. You suggested my plan would take money from successful businesses and communities. The funding mechanism, as outlined on page 7 of the proposal, actually redirects existing economic development funds that are currently underutilized, with no new taxes on businesses or communities." She paused briefly, allowing the correction to register. "But let's set that aside and focus on your broader criticism that this approach represents failed policy. I'm curious if you've had the opportunity to review the economic impact data from similar programs." Without waiting for Abbott to respond, Crockett continued. "The Texas Public Policy Foundation, which I believe you've cited as a trusted source in the past, Governor, published a study last year on targeted economic development programs in southern states. Their analysis found that every dollar invested in infrastructure and workforce development in underserved communities generated an average return of $3.80 in economic activity and $125 in tax revenue over 5 years. Crockett tapped a key on her tablet, and the data appeared on the large screens flanking the stage. This isn't from a progressive think tank. It's from a conservative institution that shares many of your economic principles. The audience had grown completely silent, unprepared for this evidence-based rebuttal to Abbott's mockery. Crockett continued in the same measured tone. You also suggested this approach has failed historically, but the data doesn't support that claim either. When your Republican predecessor, Governor Perry, implemented a similar program focused on rural Texas communities in 2012, albeit on a smaller scale, it generated over 4,000 jobs and $287 million in private investment with a taxpayer cost of only $42 million. That program was discontinued not because it failed, but because its funding was redirected to your Enterprise Fund initiative. Again, the data appeared on the screens, showing the results from the Perry administration's program. Abbott shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly unprepared for this level of specific rebuttal. As for your comment about my experience, Crockett continued, before entering public service, I spent 3 years working with community banks and credit unions to develop lending programs for small businesses in low-income areas. These programs achieved a 91% success rate and created over 600 jobs in East Texas alone. While I haven't personally built a business, as you suggested is necessary for economic understanding, I have directly facilitated the creation of dozens of successful small businesses owned by Texans who previously lacked access to capital. The dynamic in the room had shifted perceptibly. What began as Abbott's moment of political theater had transformed into a masterclass in substantive policy defense. But Crockett wasn't finished. Finally, Governor, you characterized public-private partnerships as contrary to the Texas miracle. However, your own economic development materials prominently feature the success of public-private partnerships in creating the Texas Medical Center, the Port of Houston expansion, and the San Antonio River Walk. All projects that combined government investment with private sector expertise. She displayed a screenshot from the Governor's Office of Economic Development website, which indeed highlighted these successful public-private partnerships. My proposal simply extends this proven model to communities that haven't yet benefited from it, Crockett concluded. It's not about government versus private sector. It's about how they can work together most effectively to create opportunity for all Texans, not just those in already thriving areas. With that, Crockett fell silent, her expression still composed and professional. The audience remained completely still for several seconds, processing what they had just witnessed. It wasn't just that Crockett had defended her policy. She had systematically dismantled Abbott's mockery. Using conservative sources, Republican precedent, her own relevant experience, and even the governor's own economic development materials. Santos, the moderator, finally broke the silence. Governor Abbott, would you like to respond to Congresswoman Crockett's points? All eyes turned to Abbott, who appeared momentarily at a loss for words, a rare sight for the typically polished politician. He shuffled his notes slightly, buying time as he considered his options. His expression suggested he was calculating whether to double down on his criticism, pivot to another topic, or acknowledge the substantive points Crockett had raised. Well, he finally began, his usual confidence noticeably diminished. There are obviously different perspectives on economic development approaches. His response trailed into generalities about economic philosophy, rather than addressing the specific data and examples Crockett had presented. Those watching closely noticed that for the first time in recent memory, Governor Abbott appeared to be on the defensive, unable to effectively counter a policy argument with his usual political tactics. When Abbott finished his vague response, Santos turned to the other panelists for their perspectives. The economist, clearly impressed by the exchange, noted that, Congresswoman Crockett's evidence-based approach to policy defense is refreshing in our current political climate. The CEO acknowledged that the data presented about returns on targeted investment is certainly compelling and deserves serious consideration. The remainder of the panel continued without further direct confrontation between Abbott and Crockett. But the damage to the governor's position had been done. His attempt to dismiss Crockett's plan through mockery had backfired spectacularly when met with precise, factual, and substantive rebuttal. As the panel concluded and the participants left the stage, audience members immediately began discussing what they had witnessed. Business leaders who had arrived skeptical of Crockett's approach were now engaged in serious conversations about its potential merits. Even those who remained ideologically aligned with Abbott's economic philosophy acknowledged the effectiveness of Crockett's response. "I didn't expect that level of specific data supporting her plan," admitted a bank executive to his tablemates. "I'm not saying I'm convinced, but it definitely deserves more serious consideration than I initially thought." A tech company founder nodded in agreement. "What impressed me was how she used conservative sources and Republican precedent rather than making it ideological. That's smart. She's speaking our language." Outside the venue, reporters surrounded both Abbott and Crockett for comments. The governor, maintaining his professional demeanor despite the uncomfortable exchange, offered brief remarks about the importance of economic discourse before being whisked away by aides. Crockett, by contrast, appeared energized by the discussion. Today's exchange wasn't about political points. It was about presenting a substantive policy approach backed by evidence and real-world results, she told reporters. "I believe Texans deserve that level of serious engagement on issues that affect their economic opportunities." When asked if she had anticipated Abbott's mockery and prepared her response in advance, Crockett smiled slightly. "In politics, you learn to prepare for every scenario. I came ready to discuss the substantive merits of different economic approaches. That's what I did." By evening, clips of the exchange had gone viral. The moment was captured in headlines across Texas media. "Abbott's mockery meets its match. Crockett's data-driven takedown stuns forum," declared the Houston Chronicle. Governor left speechless after failed attempt to dismiss Crockett's economic plan, read the Dallas Morning News banner. Social media exploded with reactions from across the political spectrum. The hashtag #DrantReceipts began trending as users shared the clip of Crockett methodically responding to Abbott's mockery with specific data and examples. "This is what happens when you come with mockery and meet someone who came with facts," tweeted a popular political commentator, garnering thousands of retweets. Even conservative voices found themselves acknowledging the effectiveness of Crockett's approach. Regardless of where you stand on the policy, that was a masterclass in how to handle ridicule with substance, noted a prominent right-leaning radio host. Politicians on both sides could learn from it. Political analysts quickly recognized the significance of the exchange beyond its viral appeal. What we witnessed was the limitation of a political strategy that relies on dismissing opponents rather than engaging with their ideas, explained a professor of political science from the University of Texas. When Governor Abbott attempted to mock Congresswoman Crockett's plan, rather than address its substance, he left himself vulnerable to precisely the kind of factual, evidence-based response she delivered. For Abbott's team, the exchange represented an unexpected setback. The governor had successfully used mockery and dismissal against political opponents for years, but Crockett's preparation and substantive knowledge had turned the tables in a way that resonated even with business leaders who typically aligned with Abbott's policies. "We need to reassess our approach to Crockett," an Abbott advisor told the governor during an emergency strategy meeting the following morning. "The standard playbook isn't working. She's not taking the bait for emotional exchanges. and she's coming armed with facts and data that appeal to our base's respect for practical results." Abbott nodded grimly. The political landscape in Texas was shifting in ways he hadn't fully appreciated. Crockett represented a new kind of challenge, one that couldn't be dismissed through traditional political theater. For Crockett, the aftermath of the exchange brought both opportunity and responsibility. Suddenly in demand as a speaker and policy expert, she focused on maintaining the evidence-based approach that had made her response to Abbott so effective. "I'm not interested in political gamesmanship," she explained in a subsequent interview. "I'm interested in developing policies that actually work for Texans who have been left out of our state's prosperity." The exchange with Governor Abbott wasn't about winning a debate. It was about demonstrating that there are evidence-based approaches to inclusive economic development that deserve serious consideration. When asked if she had been offended by Abbott's mockery, Crockett smiled. "Politics isn't about feelings. It's about effectiveness. The governor chose a strategy he thought would be effective in dismissing my policy. I chose a strategy I thought would be effective in defending it. The audience can judge which approach better serves Texans." Business leaders who had witnessed the exchange firsthand began reaching out to Crockett's office, requesting more information about her economic development plan. Several CEOs who had previously aligned with Abbott's economic approach expressed interest in exploring the public-private partnerships Crockett had outlined. "What caught my attention wasn't just her defense against Abbott's mockery," explained the CEO of a mid-sized manufacturing company. "It was the actual return on investment data she presented. As a business leader, I respond to results, not rhetoric." Her plan showed potential returns that would be impressive in any business context. 3 weeks after the forum, the Texas Business Alliance, a coalition of mid-sized business owners from across the state, announced their support for a pilot program based on Crockett's Community Economic Partnership model. Their statement specifically cited the compelling data on return on investment and job creation potential that had been presented at the forum. This unexpected business support forced a reassessment among political observers who had previously dismissed Crockett's approach as too progressive for Texas. What we're seeing is the power of substantive policy development over ideological positioning, noted a political strategist. By focusing on results and speaking the language of business, return on investment, job creation, market expansion, Crockett has created unusual alliances that transcend traditional political divisions. Even more surprising was the reaction from several Republican state legislators who had witnessed the exchange. State Senator James Martinez, a moderate Republican from a district with both affluent suburbs and struggling rural areas, approached Crockett about adapting portions of her plan for his district. "After seeing the data you presented, particularly from the Perry administration's similar program, I believe there's merit in this approach for my constituents," Martinez told Crockett during a meeting at the state capitol. "If we can set aside partisan labeling and focus on what works, there might be a path forward here." Abbott, recognizing the shifting momentum, adjusted his strategy. Rather than continuing to dismiss Crockett's plan outright, he began emphasizing areas of potential agreement while proposing modifications that would align the approach more closely with his economic philosophy. "While I maintain concerns about aspects of Congresswoman Crockett's proposal, there are elements related to workforce development and infrastructure that merit further discussion," Abbott stated at a press conference 6 weeks after the forum. "My office is developing an alternative framework that preserves these elements while addressing our concerns about implementation." Political observers recognize this pivot as a significant victory for Crockett's approach. When your opponent moves from mocking your policy to adopting portions of it, you've fundamentally shifted the debate, observed a political commentator. Crockett's evidence-based defense didn't just win the moment, it changed the governor's position. For ordinary Texans, particularly those in communities that would benefit from the proposed partnerships, the exchange represented something rare in modern politics. A moment when substance triumphed over theater, when mockery was defeated not by counterattack, but by evidence and expertise. "I watched that clip a dozen times," said a small business owner from East Texas. Not because of the drama, but because for once, someone was actually talking about communities like mine with real solutions instead of just political talk, and they had the facts to back it up. 6 months after the forum, the Texas legislature passed a modified version of Crockett's proposal as part of a broader economic development package. While not identical to her original plan, the legislation incorporated its core principles of targeted investment in underserved communities through public-private partnerships. At the signing ceremony, Abbott made no mention of his previous mockery of the approach. Instead, he emphasized the collaborative process that had led to the legislation and the bipartisan commitment to expanding economic opportunity. Crockett, invited to attend despite their history, maintained her focus on policy over personality. "Today isn't about political victories or defeats," she told reporters afterward. "It's about a policy approach that has the potential to create opportunity in communities that have been overlooked by traditional economic development strategies. The final legislation isn't exactly what I proposed, but it preserves the core principles and mechanisms that the evidence suggests will be effective." For political scientists and communication experts, the entire episode became a case study in effective policy advocacy. What Crockett demonstrated was that the most powerful response to mockery isn't counterattack or outrage. It's substantive knowledge and evidence, noted a professor of political communication. She didn't just win the exchange, she changed the terms of the debate from ideological positioning to practical outcomes. A year after the viral moment, Crockett reflected on its significance during a speech at her alma mater. "That exchange wasn't about Governor Abbott and me," she told the audience of political science students. "It was about two different approaches to political discourse. One based on dismissal and mockery, the other based on evidence and substance." She continued, "The lesson isn't that mockery never works politically. Unfortunately, it often does. The lesson is that it's vulnerable to substantive, evidence-based response. When you're mocked, the instinct is to respond emotionally or to countermock. Resisting that instinct and instead elevating the conversation with facts and evidence is more difficult, but ultimately more effective." The students, many aspiring to careers in politics themselves, listened attentively as Crockett concluded with a reflection that transcended partisan divisions. In a healthy democracy, policies should ultimately be judged not by who proposes them or the labels we attach to them, but by whether they actually work to improve people's lives. That's the standard I try to apply, regardless of where a policy originates or who supports it. For Texans across the political spectrum, the exchange and its aftermath represented a rare moment when the substance of governance briefly triumphed over the theater of politics. When mockery met its match, not in counterattack, but in careful preparation and substantive knowledge. If you found this breakdown of how substance and preparation can triumph over political theater valuable, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell to stay updated on more moments where evidence-based responses change the political conversation. What other political exchanges have you seen where substance prevailed over style? Share your thoughts in the comments below.